All right. Hello and welcome everyone to our office hours webinar for BrainHQ. We are so glad that you could be here joining us today. My name is Stephanie and I am the multimedia specialist here at Posit Science within the customer support team. Now, my co-host today is Dr. Henry Monka. Henry, you want to say hi?
Hey folks, nice to see everyone.
Most of you have probably seen Henry in our previous webinars, but if you are joining us for the first time, Henry earned his PhD in neuroscience at the University of California, San Francisco, where he studied brain plasticity with our co-founder, Dr. Michael Merznick. He's been running the show here as our CEO of Posit Science since 2011. Let's go over a brief agenda for today. Henry is going to go ahead and give a brief presentation about attention in the brain. And then following that, we're going to run a poll to see which of the attention exercises you'd like us to demo for you. Now, there are a lot more of you in the audience than there are of us. So that means that we likely aren't going to be able to answer every question today. But good news, you can send any follow-up questions to our support team. Our email address is support@brainhq.com. We also have a support site, which you can find at support.brainhq.com, that will have answers to a lot of common questions, particularly about the exercises. The other thing that I wanted to note is that today's webinar is being recorded and it will get posted to our YouTube channel sometime in the next week. If you'd like to be notified when that video goes live, you can go to youtube.com/brainhq and subscribe there in order to receive a notification. You can also find previous webinars that we've completed, all listed on our channel there as well. All right, so Henry, I'm going to go ahead and toss it over to you. Take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay, super. I will take over the screen share. Let's start off by asking the question, what attention is? Probably all of us have a notion of what attention is, right? We probably can feel like when we're paying attention to something. We probably notice if we feel like maybe other people aren't paying attention to us. But it's a tricky concept, and scientists have been trying to get a better definition of it for decades and even centuries. And in fact, if you roll the clock all the way back to 1890, where William James, one of the founders of the sort of the scientific study of the human mind and perception, wrote just a wonderful book called The Principles of Psychology, where he thought about just about every aspect of psychology and mental function. And when he came to a section on attention, what he wrote was this. Attention is the taking possession by the mind in clear and vivid form of one out of what may seem several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thoughts. And it implies withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others. And that's actually a pretty good description of attention. Let's go through it phrase by phrase for just a moment. Attention is the taking possession of the mind. So what he's saying is that when we're paying attention to something, we feel like most of our mental resources are now devoted to the thing we're paying attention to. In clear and vivid form, when we pay attention to something, we feel like our ability to process its details or to understand it is accentuated. We're bringing more resources to bear on what we pay attention to. Of one out of what may seem several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thoughts. So here William James is getting at the idea that there might be a lot of things going on either in the world or even a lot of things going on in our mind that we're thinking about. And what attention allows us to do is select one of those things to sort of tamp down the others so they don't distract us and select that one thing for this extra processing. It implies withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others. Again, back to that notion of we have to suppress certain things in order to enhance the processing of others. So that's actually a very nice, I think, mental description of what it's like to pay attention to something. And, I think what it really highlights is as we move through the world, there's just an enormous number of things going on. And if our brain was required to process everything that was happening to us at the same time, we would simply be overwhelmed, right? Think about driving down the street in a car, for example. You have to, think of everything that's going on. You have traffic, you have pedestrians, you might have, red and green lights, you might have speed limits, you have other cars that are obeying the law, you might have other cars that aren't obeying traffic laws. You have to select certain parts of that to process because it's all so challenging, and you have to ignore other parts in order to be an effective driver. But of course, you have to remain alert to the idea that some of those other parts might become suddenly very important to you. So moving through reality, whether you're driving a car near your home or just about anything we do, it's almost like drinking from a fire hose. When I think about this, I think about this wonderful picture of this poor dog here drinking from a fire hose. And in many ways, our attention system is like this dog, right? We have to select a certain region of this enormous fire hose of information that's coming out of it. We have to try and process that, as the dog is doing by trying to drink this water. But there's a huge amount of other information that's got to be flying by us that we have to ignore so we can actually get what we want out of this, in this case, the dog drinking the water. And that's what paying attention is like. It's like drinking from that fire hose and picking just the part that you want to try and keep up with. Now, since William James in the 1890s, scientists have gone on to sort of more carefully think about different kinds of attentions. And, here's one common framework for thinking about attention that I thought I would say a few words about. And this framework breaks attention down into 5 different concepts. And we'll start at the upper right here. There's the concept of arousal. This is almost the overall level of attention that you might have at any particular moment in time, right? Maybe you're sleepy and you're just not going to process that much information. Or maybe you've just woken up and you've had a cup of coffee and you got some exercise and you are peppy and raring to go. You have a high level arousal. You can pay a lot of attention. So arousal is that global state of how much attention you have to pay. And then the next concept is focused attention. And here the idea, like this young person looking at this butterfly, is that when we focus our attention, we can process details better. We can see the complete picture better. So by focusing attention, we devote our brain power to processing a specific thing in the world, something we see, something we hear, and we process it more completely and better as a result. Related to that, there's the idea of selective attention. Hey, when we're focusing attention on something, in this case, this young person focusing on the butterfly, well, we're almost by definition filtering out things that we don't consider relevant. So this kid might be focusing their attention on the butterfly, but selecting the butterfly and not paying attention to, for example, the flowers around the butterfly. So the notion of paying attention implies, by its very nature, the idea that we are going to devote less resources to things that we consider irrelevant. And in fact, we may want to actively suppress processing of that irrelevant information so it doesn't distract us. Another way to look at it is if you think about this kid looking at this butterfly, information from the butterfly, the light reflected off of the butterfly, its color and its shape is entering the kid's eye, but so is that information from the flowers. All of that information is entering in the eye, but the brain wants to focus attention on, in this case, the butterfly. And even though the information about the flowers is reaching the brain wants to tamp that down so it doesn't devote resources to what it considers irrelevant. Next is the concept of alternating attention. It's very clear that we can move our attention back and forth between one or even several different objects that we've decided are of interest. And that helps, in a way, pay attention to several things that might be important at once. And then related to alternating attention is the idea of divided attention. And here the idea is that we can take our attention and we can split it. We can pay attention to 2 things at once if we work hard at it. And that might be important for all kinds of things that we do in life, where we need to, track 2 players on a field who are playing hockey, or track 2 kids at a playground who are running around that we want to keep track of. And our attention can help us do that. So these are all ways that scientists have started to think about different kinds of attention. I want to emphasize that there's a lot of ways to think about attention. It turns out to be an incredibly complex subject, but this is a nice way to think about some of those aspects of attention that you may use in your ordinary life. So often the question then comes up, well, hey, where in the brain is attention? Are there certain centers of the brain that relate to attention? And there definitely are some parts of the brain that are specialized for different kinds of attention. But I want to step back and paint a slightly broader picture, which is just about every part of the brain is involved in attention in some way, shape, or form. We have the notion of what you might call bottom-up attention. And what I mean by that is it's really important for our brain that something new and exciting in the world can capture our attention, even if we're not aware of it. Again, think of driving. Right? You might hear a motorcycle start to go past you as you're driving, and that sound comes in your ear, and even though you weren't expecting it, it's really important that that gets processed by the earliest parts of your brain that deal with sound processing, and that tells your brain, hey, something important is happening here. I need to capture your attention from whatever else you were paying attention to. And then you might see the motorcycle zip by you in a window, and that brings information in through your visual system that further helps capture your attention. So this is what I mean by bottom-up attention. Every sensory system in your body, whether it's hearing, sight, touch, your smell even, your taste, all of those can create information in your brain that's important for your attention system to notice. So that flows up to the front of your brain where you're doing your thinking and your decision making. But then, of course, simultaneously, we have top-down attention. We can decide what to pay attention to. Maybe you're out at dinner at a noisy restaurant with a friend, and there's conversations going on all around you. But you can specifically decide, hey, I'm going to pay attention to my friend. I'm going to focus and select my conversation with my friend to devote my attention to. We think of that as top-down attention. You're making a decision in your frontal cortex up here at the front of your brain, and this is the home of your executive function and your decision-making ability and these kinds of very high-level abilities. You can make that decision up here in the front of your brain, and that actually sends information back to the earliest steps of visual processing or auditory processing, so that that irrelevant conversation doesn't really make it very far into your brain because you've decided not to pay attention to it. So in that sense, attention is a very global system and involving this kind of mix of bottom-up information from the world to capture your attention and top-down information from your own decision-making around what to pay attention to. Now, that means that attention is a really complex system in the brain. And of course, naturally, what that means is, well, there are things that can go wrong in attention in the brain. And I thought I might just say a few words about two disorders of attention that you may have come across or may have heard of that have shed some light on how scientists think about attention in the brain. The first is a phenomenon called visual neglect. And this is an attentional disorder that can happen after a very specific kind of stroke. Now, one very interesting thing about the brain, and this is very weird, but it is absolutely true, is that, hey, the right side of the brain, you've probably seen pictures of the brain, and you can see that, hey, there's a right side and a left side. For the most part, the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. And this is sort of a fun mystery in evolutionary science as to why our brains, and that of every animal that has a backbone, is wired up in such a complex way, but it's true. And one of the very interesting things that we see about this is this phenomenon of visual neglect. There's a certain kind of stroke that can happen. And as you know, a stroke is when you have a blood burst in your brain, and that blood leaking into your brain causes brain damage. Well, there's a certain kind of stroke that can happen on the right side of the brain where it causes impairment of attention in the left side of the world. And the way doctors can notice that, for example, is, well, here's a clock over on the right. And if I were to ask you to copy this clock, I would imagine you could copy it pretty accurately. But if you'd had a stroke that damaged this right side of your brain, you would actually lose a lot of your ability to pay attention to the left side of the world. And you might draw a copy of the clock that looks like this. And this is an odd looking clock, right? But when you look at it, what you realize is this person is only seeing the right-hand side of the clock. They've copied the 1, the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They kind of got the idea there was a 7, but they simply didn't notice any of the other numbers on the original clock here on the left side. And that's because their attention has been damaged so that they don't really perceive the left side of the world. Here's a house, for example, and if I were to ask you to copy this house, I bet you do a pretty good job. But a patient who's had this kind of stroke is, again, only copying the right side of the house because they're not seeing the left side of the house. Here's a flower, and a flower copied by a patient with visual neglect, only the right-hand side of the flower. So that tells us something pretty interesting about how attention works in the brain. And it certainly shows us that attention is incredibly important, because if you've ever known a person who has this kind of symptom after they've had a stroke, it's actually a really big life-impairing problem, right? These people fall more often. They bump into things more often because they don't see on the left-hand side of their world. They might only eat half of their dinner because they don't notice half of their dinner's on their plate. Certainly, you can imagine if you're out driving with this kind of visual challenge, this kind of attention challenge, you're not going to be a safe driver. And one of the biggest and most challenging parts about it is often, because this is a disorder of attention, the person doesn't notice what they're missing. The person who's drawn this clock, for example, they typically think they've done a great job drawing the clock. It can be very difficult to convince a person who has visual neglect that they've missed half the world. And of course, because they don't recognize they have a problem, it's quite challenging to help them with it. As a side note, I have to say my colleague, Dr. Tom Van Vliet, who you may have seen on other Brain Health Academy webinars, has done a wonderful study using BrainHQ training to help people who have this kind of visual neglect symptom, and just seen some great results about improving attention as a result. But another disorder relating to attention that probably almost everyone has heard of, because it's very common these days, is ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We normally think about this as a disorder that happens in kids, and there are really two types of ADHD that have been studied. There's inattentive ADHD, which I think can be thought of as a disorder of attention. You know, the classic, hey, my kid can't pay attention in school, right? You can see in this picture, here's the teacher, she's trying to teach some math, and here's this kid, and he's looking out the window. And clinicians would call this an inattentive form of ADHD. And what they mean by that is that the brain systems by which that devote attention to something interesting and relevant, in this case the teacher teaching math, don't seem to be working as they would in other kids. And this kid's attention is unable to be captured, and so they stare out the windows and don't learn math. Now, that's certainly a problem for a lot of kids, as we've seen. I have to say, as a scientist, I also wonder if it just means that the kids' attention systems are focused on things that kid finds to be interesting rather than school. But we do live in a world where kids are going to go to school, so this is a challenge for kids and families and teachers. The other form of ADHD is often called a hyperactivity. That's the H in ADHD. And you can see this little girl is bouncing on her bed and bouncing off the walls. Again, that's actually pretty normal behavior for a lot of kids, but when it happens in situations where it's inappropriate, eventually a kid might get diagnosed in this way. And as a scientist, is this a disorder of attention? Maybe it's more a disorder of decision-making or executive function. We're learning more and more about this as we go. But again, it shows to show you how important attention systems are in the brain, because when they're not working quite right, it can cause an enormous amount of trouble for all kinds of people. So with that in mind, I think we're ready to go on and say a few words and do some demoing about the kind of attention training that is part of BrainHQ. And Stephanie's going to lead these demos, and I'm going to comment them as a scientist and as someone who helped invent most of these brain training exercises. And we'll take your questions throughout. So Stephanie, over to you.
All right, fantastic. So let me go ahead and get this poll launched for everybody. So you should see the poll being launched just about now. So what we want you to do is to rank the attention exercises in order of importance to you, as it pertains to how much do you want us to demo those exercises for you today. So we have target tracker, we have double decision, we have divided attention, mixed signals, and freeze frame. Now, the way that the poll is sort of structured is it's sort of a 1 to 5 scale for each of these exercises. So say you really, really want us to work on target tracker, go ahead and mark target tracker as a 5 out of 5. If you don't want us to work on divided attention, put that as a 1 out of 5. That's maybe not as important to you. Once we have a bunch of folks who have submitted their poll answers, we'll share the results and then pick out a couple exercises to demo for y'all. Henry, is there a particular exercise that you're hoping we're going to be able to cover today?
Well, I always like double decision because it's such an interesting exercise, and divided attention is such a complex topic. And it's true that sometimes people have a hard time learning double decision because you have to respond in a little bit of a complex way. And then, I was kind of wondering if people might like us to demo freeze frame, just because that's an exercise that works kind of differently than a lot of other BrainHQ exercises, and I want to make sure it gets the love it deserves. But let's see what comes up in our audience. How about you, Stephanie? Do you have a favorite attention exercise, regardless of which one you want to demo? Is there one that you like doing more than the other ones?
I'm really kind of a sucker for target tracker. It was one of the first exercises that I really started to sort of drill down into within BrainHQ when I first started my training.
Okay.
And I struggle with it still sometimes. Usually I find myself, hovering around 5 or 6 objects on a really, really good day.
I'm not
And
sure that's a struggle exactly,
well,
Stephanie. That sounds pretty good to me.
okay, fair. But also double decision is a great exercise that I also really, really enjoy. But I also understand if people want us to demo freeze frame, because like you said, it is structured very differently from the rest of our exercises.
You will go where our audience wants to go. Of all these five, my personal favorite is double decision. I like doing it, and I also have a fondness for it because the original concept of double decision was invented by some researchers outside of BrainHQ. And when we saw the data behind the exercise, we got really excited and reached out to these academic scientists and just had a wonderful collaboration with Dr. Carleen Ball and Dr. Dan Runker to take what they had invented and bring it into BrainHQ and make it a modern brain training exercise. So I really treasured that academic collaboration. And then I have to say, as some of our audience may know, double decision training is specifically related to driving safety. And a few years ago, I was driving my kids up to Lake Tahoe, and it was cold and snowy out. And a deer jumped into the road out of the corner. Deer jumped into the road, and I saw it out of the corner of my eye. And I stepped on the brake, just lickety split, and then the deer ran off. And I absolutely attribute staying out of an accident that day to the fact that my peripheral vision was so sharp and fast, thanks to all the double decision training I've done. So that's my favorite. All right, what does our audience say? What do you see here?
Yeah, let's go ahead and end the poll there. We got most folks have replied. So let's see. Our number one, the exercise that the people most want to see, it looks like divided attention.
Wow.
Surprisingly enough, one of our CPT exercises. So actually that does kind of make some sense there. All right, so let me go ahead and switch over to my demo window here. I'll go ahead and pull up divided attention, and Henry can sort of talk about the exercise as I go through it.
Okay, well, let's let you get it up. Divided attention is an interesting and a challenging exercise, as Stephanie mentioned, and as is right there in the name of the exercise, we're challenging one of the more complex aspects of attention, which is your ability to divide your attention, to essentially split it, so that you're paying attention to two things at once. And then we're going to ask you to make decisions based on the information that's flowing into this. And then to make it even a little bit more complex, as Stephanie indicated, this is what's called a continuous performance exercise. And what that means is that in difference to most BrainHQ exercises, when you see something or hear something, you can take as long as you like to tell us the answer. If you've played the Hawkeye exercise, for example, where you see those birds, once you see the birds, they go away, but you're in no rush to tell us where you saw a bird. You may take as much time as you like. But certain exercises, like divided attention, are continuous performance exercises. And that means you have to respond at pace. You have to respond essentially as quickly as the visual stimuli are being presented to you. And that makes it a little bit more challenging. But let's take a look. Are you getting the demo up, Stephanie?
Yes, is it not sharing?
Nope, not for me anyway.
All right, give me just a second here. Hey folks, would you let us know if you're able to see the screen with my demo here? Apologies. Here, let me go back and start this level over just to be sure. Okay, so I have some confirmation from the chat that they're able to see my screen. There is a new Zoom feature. There are like Zoom tabs at the top of the window, that there should be something that says Stephanie's presentation.
You know what, Stephanie? You're teaching me something every day, so everyone can see it, and I need to click on the tab. So thank you for helping me out.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so let me go ahead and start this level over again. Whew. I got it up to a pretty fast clip earlier, so I'm glad that I get to kind of start over a little
So do you
bit.
want to walk through the instructions for people, and then I'll talk a little bit about the science?
Yeah, absolutely. So here, let me actually just back it up. So like Henry was saying, in divided attention, there's going to be some sort of criteria or instruction. There are going to be two shapes that appear on screen, and you have to determine whether or not those two shapes meet the criteria. If they do, you select yes. If they don't, you select no. And you have to do that within a time limit. So for this first level of divided attention, the criteria is same color. So if I see two shapes that are on screen that are the same color, I select yes. If they are different colors, then I'll go ahead and select no. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So no, no. Now, another thing that I will say is that with all of our timed exercises, rather than using the mouse to try and quickly select yes or no, I'm instead using the keyboard, using the right key to select no, or the right arrow key to select no, and then the left arrow key to select yes. The other thing here, I'm going to take my hands off and we'll see that that timer will mark you wrong if you don't answer within a certain amount of time. And then that's actually one of the things that we get comments about with divided attention is, oh, it's going too fast. How do I slow it down? If you go like this and just let it run and get a bunch of answers wrong, what's going to happen is that the exercise is automatically going to adjust to whatever speed you need it to be. And then once you're able to sort of process that information again, you can jump back in and then start training from that point as well.
And that's a really important piece of advice for this exercise because as it gets faster, it can start to seem overwhelming. And it's very easy to kind of get off the cycle and be responding correctly, but just not quite fast enough. And like Stephanie says, if that happens to you, just don't respond at all for a while. It's fine to get things wrong in BrainHQ as it always is, and that will slow it back on down to a level where you can kind of get back on, so to speak, and get back into the rhythm of it.
Yeah, so now we're seeing that I've got quite a few of these questions right, and now the timer is starting to pick up a lot.
It's going very fast now. So what are we doing with your attention here? I'll say a few words while Stephanie works hard on this exercise. What are we doing with your attention here? Well, there are two objects. And so you have to divide your attention a little bit to sort of split between the two objects, and that's important. But the other aspect of attention that we're engaging here is something that I didn't mention in my talk, but some scientists would call executive attention. And that means your ability to do decision making about the things that you are paying attention to. And because divided attention is a rule following exercise, where you have a rule, in this case, the same color, that engages these decision-making parts of your brain. So you're dividing attention to bring information into your brain, and then you are making a decision about it. And of course, you're doing that at speed to help make your brain faster and more accurate. And that reminds me to say that we are talking about attention exercises today, but every exercise in BrainHQ, it relates to different sorts of cognitive abilities. This is certainly primarily an attention exercise, but quite obviously it's challenging your speed as well. And then as I just mentioned, it also challenges your decision making or your executive function. And that's a different cognitive area, but one that's tapped into by this exercise. So it's doing a lot of things for us at once, and maybe that's why it's a little challenging. Stephanie, do you want to show another level of it so we can talk about what happens when the rules change?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great suggestion. So let me go ahead and head back out of here. So that was the first level of stage 1. Let's jump down to somewhere in stage 3 and see what that looks like.
It's going to be exciting.
Oh boy.
Well, all right. Tell us, what is this rule all about, Stephanie? It looks like it got quite a bit more complicated.
Yeah, so instead of just one rule, it is one rule that is one facet. You have one rule that is two facets. So you have to make sure that the two shapes that appear on screen are going to be the same color, and they also have to have the same interior. So there are different interiors to these shapes. You can have sort of an open interior, like this example that we see on the screen. It could be a solid interior, or it can have sort of be partially filled in with extra lines. So this one I'm really going to have to keep an eye on.
All right, well, I'll do the talking and you train for a little bit, but
Perfect. I was going to say we have quite a few questions in the Q&A about this exercise, so that might be a good thing to sort of look through as I'm training with this one as well.
All right, well, I'll say a few words about it, then I will try to take a look here. So those have a solid interior, different interiors, a blank interior, Those have that textured interior and different. And I mentioned this because I have taken a few customer support questions about what do we mean by the interior. So I hope that helps. Again, different interiors, hollow interiors, striped interiors. You get the idea. But of course, sometimes the interior matches and the color doesn't, and sometimes the color matches and the interior doesn't. So your brain really has to work hard to keep at this. And as Stephanie mentioned, it's absolutely essential to use the keyboard controls here, those shortcuts, the left arrow for yes and the right arrow for no. That's really the only way you'll be able to respond fast enough to keep up with this exercise. If you're doing this on a phone or a tablet, you can just use your thumbs and keep up with it really quite quickly. So I'm going to take a quick pass through the questions here and see if there are any divided attention specific questions I should try and hit on. So let's see, we are getting tons of great questions, but I'm going to try and focus on any divided attention ones in particular. Here's everyone saying they can see Stephanie's screen, so that's great, thank you. There's one person saying their chat is disabled. That's exactly right. Please ask your questions through the Q&A, that will help us out. And here's one person asking, hey, is this exercise easier on an iPad? To me, it's about as easy or as hard, because it's a hard exercise, on an iPad or a laptop. But again, if you're doing it on a laptop or a desktop, use those left-right arrows. If you're doing it on an iPad, the buttons are carefully positioned to be right underneath your thumbs. Here's someone asking, hey, why are there so many turns, right? When Stephanie started this, it showed like 100 turns. When I do a Hawkeye exercise or a target exercise, maybe I'll have 10 turns or 20 turns. And the reason there are so many turns on this exercise is because, well, the turns are really fast, as you just saw. And you go through 100 of them quite quickly. Each BrainHQ level has been engineered, so on the average, it should take 2.5 or 3 minutes. Now, sometimes it takes a little longer, sometimes it's a little quicker, but 100 turns it gives us kind of the right amount of total time on the average. Here's someone asking what key to tap, and again, I'll emphasize that the keys, oh yeah, Stephanie's showing it right now. The keys line up with the answer. So the left key means, start it again, if the left key means yes, because yes is on the left, and the right key means no, because no is on the right. So. Here's someone saying, I have a keyboard option on my iPad. I would love to use it for the exercises like divided attention. It is true, the iPad does offer a great keyboard. It's good for writing emails or typing in your web addresses. We don't offer the keyboard on the iPad because it would take up too much space. The keyboard has to kind of come into the screen, if I may put it that way. And for most exercises, the keyboard would sort of get in the way of the things you need to see. So we just use the touch response on the iPad. But again, if you're holding your iPad, so it's in kind of the wide, it's like oriented like a TV and it's nice and wide, those yes and no buttons should be right under your thumbs, and that should work pretty well. And let's see, any other questions about divided attention in particular? So. Okay.
Yeah, actually, Clifford had a question that, Henry, I'm going to toss to you. Clifford is asking about color perception, and I think it would be a good opportunity to talk about the colors selected as it pertains to color blindness and accessibility.
Yeah, that is a great question. One of the scientists on staff is actually a specialist in color perception. And we've worked pretty hard to make sure that all of the things that you see here can be interpreted, even if you have common forms of color blindness. So for example, we're not using red and green stimuli here because for a person who has red-green color blindness, those stimuli would look like they were the same color, even if they were different. So some of the exercises are certainly a little bit more challenging if you have color blindness, but that's okay. They're adaptive. They'll find a right level of challenge for you. But in all cases, even a person who has the common forms of color blindness should be able to tell the difference where it's important that they tell the difference. If you find a place where you feel like that's a real problem for you, let us know. You can email us at support@brainhq.com, and we're always happy to kind of take a second look and make sure it's workable, because we certainly want brain training and BrainHQ to help just about every kind of brain that we find out there. So. One person asked, and then maybe we'll go on to the next one, does a slow computer connection affect the ability to do this exercise? And the answer to that is no. Even if you have a slow internet connection, the way BrainHQ works is that the entire exercise gets downloaded to your computer, and when it's training, just as Stephanie was doing, that's all happening right on your computer. It doesn't need to go through your slow internet connection for that. And if it gets too fast, again, just take a break, let it slow down for a little bit, and then get back on. We've had a ton of great questions here, Stephanie, but probably we should go on to another exercise or two. So we hit on a few more ones.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to double decision. That looks like it was the number 2 most voted on as important. So let's go ahead and bring that up. All right, so actually I'm going to jump to stage 2. That way we get both the Route 66 sign and the different cars. So what's going to happen in this exercise for those that need a refresher? There is going to be one of these cars that appear in the middle of the screen, either this box truck or the soft top, and somewhere out in the periphery, there's going to be a Route 66 sign, and there in this particular level, also going to be distractor signs out in the periphery. So our task is to identify, one, the kind of vehicle that shows up in the middle of the screen. There's going to be some static. And then 2, identify the portion of the screen in the periphery where the Route 66 sign had appeared. So let's go ahead and give that a go. And Henry, I will toss it to you to talk about some of the science and intricacies of this exercise.
Sure. Why don't you get a few wrong to slow it down a little bit at first, if you don't mind?
That's a good idea.
You are very fast, Stephanie, but we're on a Zoom call here. So this exercise in particular trains and was originally designed and does train divided attention. And what we mean by that is that in order to get it right, although Stephanie's going to get it wrong on purpose here for a little while, you have to divide or split your attention. Part of your attention has to go to the center of the screen because you're doing this pretty challenging task to see is that a car or a truck in a very short interval of time. But you have to divide your attention so that you reserve some of your attention for your peripheral vision, where you have to notice where's that road sign, off in the corner of your eye. So you're explicitly dividing your attention. And I think most people, when they do this exercise, they feel that. They feel like they're paying attention to the center of the screen, and they can feel like there's a little bit of spotlight, one might say, somewhere in their attention that's looking around in your peripheral vision. So that's what we're doing from a science perspective. And I'll say why that's important in a moment. What I want to say a word or two now about, as Stephanie's doing this, or maybe Stephanie, you want to say this, is can you really walk us through how do you respond to this? When do you see it, and then what do you click? I think that's the thing I get the most questions about with this exercise.
Yeah, it is a little bit unique as far as other BrainHQ exercises go because it is sort of a 2-part answer. So here, let me walk you through. So we have everything show up on screen. There's some static, and then we see the 2 vehicle options here. Now, before the static, I saw the box truck in the center, I believe. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And I heard that beep sound, and now it's giving me the option to select a section of the screen, which means that I selected the right vehicle, and now I need to select the portion of the screen that the Route 66 sign had appeared in. I think it was this section. There we go.
Very good.
And I got that little boop sound or that little ding sound to let me know that I got it right.
So I'll let you do a few, and then I'll narrate for us just to kind of hammer
Sure.
it home. Go ahead and get this one wrong, let's say, for the sake of discussion.
Cool.
Okay, so now we're going to see it. Everyone watch. There's something in the middle and then the Route 66 sign. They're going to be covered with static and go away. Now, when you see it, you can't respond at all. Don't click on anything while it's showing you the cars or the road signs or the static. You have to wait till here. And now we have to make our first response. Now, we were paying attention to the center of the screen. Did we see a car or a truck? And I saw a car, so I'll ask Stephanie to click on that car on the left. So it highlights screen, she clicks on it. She got it right. You heard that beep. And because she got it right, it's going to go on to the next section here. So now Stephanie's going to use her mouse to indicate where did she see that road sign. And boy, I'm not sure I was paying enough attention. I think it was around 11 o'clock. What do you think?
It was definitely one of these 2. I'm just trying to remember which one.
If you don't know,
Let's
just
go ahead and give it a guess.
Okay.
A.
Let's do one more. There it is again. Okay, now here's where we respond. Now let's say we were to get this wrong. So I saw a car, but let's say we didn't notice and we guessed truck. Go ahead and click on truck. When you click on it, it's going to show you what the right answer was right here. So if you don't guess correctly the car or the truck, it's never even going to ask you to try and guess where the sign is, right? It's going to stop you right there and show you what the right answer. Alternatively, if we get the first part right, so I wasn't looking, Stephanie, was this a car or a truck this time?
I think it was, nope, it was definitely the car.
Let's do
Okay,
another one. Okay, so
all
now
right,
we get
that
to
time
see
it was
car
the
or
car.
truck. It was a car. Go ahead. Now let's get this part wrong. So it was actually around, I think, 7 o'clock. But let's say we didn't notice and we guess up here around 10 o'clock when you click. Again, it just gives you that little thunk and shows you what the correct answer is. So the key part about this is really that two-part response. First watch, then guess car or truck, and then guess where did you see it. And if you get in that kind of rhythm, you're going to move through this exercise very smoothly. Let's see if there are some double decision questions here that I should take. Someone says, "Hey, I found with the shorter intervals it helps to make a conscious effort not to blink." I think that's a good idea. This exercise can get a little quick, and I do sort of start it and very consciously open up my eyes and make sure that I'm getting all the information in and not missing something with a blink. So. Someone else asks, hey, is it typical to have some areas of the screen that are harder to see the peripheral sign? And I think what that question is asking is, hey, maybe I commonly get it wrong if it's in the 6 o'clock position, for example. And it seems harder for me to notice when it's down there. And I would say that's not uncommon, and it's not uncommon for two reasons. First of all, the exercise itself has somewhat different patterns in different parts of the screen. For example, on this level, it might be a little bit easier to notice the road sign up there around 11 o'clock where Stephanie is, because she's just against the sky. Whereas, hey, if the road sign is down at like 3 or 4 o'clock, it's kind of against the rest of that desert, and it might be harder to notice. So the exercise itself can be a little asymmetrical. And it's also true that different people can have some asymmetries in their own attention. There's an enormous field of attention research, and hey, sometimes we're a little bit better at noticing things in the top part of our visual field than the bottom, for example, or various things like that. So if it's a little harder, that's fine. I would say if you notice that if you never get it, if you've done many levels of double decision across a couple weeks, and you consistently miss it when it's in a particular position, you might want to go talk to your doctor about that. Double decision's not exactly meant to be a diagnosis, it's a brain training program. But hey, if you notice that kind of anomaly, you may want to talk to a doctor who can get you referred for a more comprehensive visual system workup to see if there's something funny going on. So, great question. Thanks. Shall we move on to one more exercise here, Stephanie?
That sounds good. So let me go ahead and hit pause on that. The next most voted on exercise was target tracker. Yay. Okay, cool.
Oh, your favorite.
One of my favorites. Okay, so let's go to explore all exercises and then target tracker. And then let's go to the second level since I haven't done that one before. Okay. So target tracker, for those that need a refresher, is one of our attention exercises, obviously. But what's going to happen is there are going to be a couple of objects that appear on screen. They're going to start to move around, and then more objects of the same kind are going to appear on screen and also be moving around. So our task is to keep our focus on the original objects that had first appeared. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So I'm going to hit start. We've got 3 pufferfish to kick off this level. All those other pufferfish faded in, and I was doing my best to try and keep track of the original
Let's get
3.
one wrong at first, Stephanie, just so we
Yeah, let's slow it down.
Again, if it becomes overwhelming, it's always fine to get one wrong on purpose. I do it all the time and make
especially at the beginning of a level.
Make the exercise get down better for you.
Yep. Yeah, so we can see when I first started this level, it started me off with 3 pufferfish that I needed to follow, and now it is asking me to only follow 2. So that is one of the ways that this exercise is able to sort of adjust and make it easier for you if you're having an off training day or if that's just the level that you're training at.
Great. So why don't you start to get them now, Stephanie, and I'll talk a little bit about the science of this. So target tracker is training a couple different kinds of attention at the same time. So on the one hand, it is definitely training, again, an aspect of, well, there's two kinds of attention here that are relevant. You might think of this as divided attention, where you're stretching your attention across 2 or 3 or 4 objects that you have to keep track of. You might also think of it as a kind of alternating attention. The way some people do this exercise is they sort of move their attention from one fish to the next, so they can kind of give a little bit of attention to each target and make sure they keep an eye on it. And then also I might say it's a form of sustained attention. You have to pay attention over a significant length of time in order to do this exercise. It's not about noticing something quickly, it's about maintaining that attention over the entire period of time that the fish are swimming around so you can track them. So you can see that it targets several different kinds of attention at once, and that's what makes it such a great exercise.
All right.
Let's see. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how you approach this from a cognitive perspective, Stephanie, as you do it? Because there are a
Yeah,
couple of
absolutely.
ways people think about this exercise.
Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and hit start, and I'll sort of talk through my process here. So I first see these 2 puffer fish, and they start moving around. And one of the tricks that I like to do is I like to try and connect lines between the original target objects. In my head, I am sort of imagining a line between this one and this one, which were my 2 original targets. When you get up to, 3, 4, or more targets, sometimes instead of just imagining lines, like imagining them creating a sort of moving polygon or some sort of a moving shape is also very helpful.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So for me, Stephanie, if there's 3 objects, I try to imagine them like a triangle that's kind of moving around. Here there's 2, so I imagine them connected by a line, and that helps my attention system keep track of the 2. And when they get on to 3, I imagine they're a triangle. And the triangle is kind of changing shape as the fish move around, but it still helps my brain to sort of visualize it as a triangle. Someone asks us, Stephanie, it's not clear what key to tap for the puffer fish. They all look the same. So here, that's a great question. There's actually no keyboard shortcuts here. Well, in general, I should say there's no keyboard shortcuts. And so unlike the other exercise where you can tap the left and right arrows, here you actually do need to use the mouse if you are on a laptop or a regular PC, or if you're using your phone or a tablet, you can just touch them with your finger. And that works quite well for most people. Someone says, hey, I use my fingers a little bit to help me with this. And hey, that's a perfectly fine way to kind of get started on this. If you're pointing at a fish and moving it around, that can help direct your attention. I would suggest trying to use that as a way to get started. If you're learning the exercise and you're just tracking 1 or 2 and that's helping you, that sounds great. Once you've made a little bit more progress and maybe you're starting to track 3 of them, I would try to not use your finger at that point, because once you're tracking 3, it's nice to just fully exercise your brain on that front. But it is a great way to get started. It's a great way to get started. Do you mind showing one other level here? I have someone who has
Yeah, absolutely.
jellyfish level, if you happen to know one of the levels. Jellyfish.
Jellyfish, yes. All right, let me see what I can do here.
If you've done a bunch of target tracker, you might know that it starts off with bubbles and it moves on to puffer fish, and then eventually it has these very challenging levels. Here we go, I think, where you're going to see these pink jellyfish on this blue background. And some people have pointed out, hey, this is quite hard to see the jellyfish on this background. And hey, that's on purpose, right? We want your brain to have to work harder to even be able to sort of notice the objects on this complicated background. And so, for example, you might be at a point where you can track 3 or 4 of the pufferfish, and then you come to one of these jellyfish levels and maybe you're tracking just, 2 objects or sometimes 1. That's okay. Your goal isn't always to track 4 objects. Your goal is to track the most objects that you can, given how challenged we've made the exercise. So why did we make this, harder to see in this way? Well, that's because when you're out in the real world, and again, I'll come back to driving, it's just such a common example. Sometimes things are complex and on complex backgrounds and hard to notice while you're driving. And what we want your brain to be trained to do is even under situations where it's hard to see, hey, what's in front of you and what's in the background, we still want your brain to be able to exercise and use these kinds of attentional abilities. So it's harder, and you're going to get fewer right. I know I do when I do these levels, but that's okay. That's exactly the way the brain training is meant to be working. Great question.
I also want to add, because this is a question we often get a lot, is how, like, should you be using a hard focus or a soft focus? So
What do you mean
when
by
we talk
what
about
do you mean by a hard focus and a soft focus, Stephanie?
exactly. So a hard focus is going to be something where like you are pinpointing one specific object and then you're like following it around with your eyes. Whereas a soft focus is you are just kind of taking in more information and you're not following one specific thing, but you're just kind of letting your peripheral vision do a lot of the work. And so that is usually what I like to do for this exercise is I kind of relax my eyes actually a little bit, kind of zone out a little bit, and then sort of let my periphery do the work for me here.
Yep. Yep. I think that's a good way to think about it. Okay, we have just a few more minutes, Stephanie. Do you think we should take a quick look at another exercise, or should we focus and see if there's some other more general questions we want to work our way through here?
I would say we've probably got about 5 minutes left. I don't know if that's enough time for us to devote to a whole other exercise, but if there are other questions about attention exercises in general, I think that would be a good use of our time.
All right, well, why don't we look through the questions here and see what else we should try and take here. I'm just going to pass through. There's a couple people who ask about glaucoma and how glaucoma plays into this. And of course, glaucoma is an issue in your eye itself, not your brain, where because of changes that happen over the course of aging in the eye, less light and less visual information get through. And of course, that can make all of these exercises more challenging. The good news is that's okay. Commonly when someone comes to me with a question like this, what they mean is, hey, maybe I can track 2 objects in Target Tracker, but I feel like I could probably track 3 or 4 if I didn't have glaucoma. And that might be right? You might track fewer objects than someone who's exactly like you in every other way who doesn't have glaucoma. But that's okay for brain training. What we're trying to do with brain training is it doesn't matter too much, frankly, whether you're tracking 2 or 4 or 8. What matters is that your brain is being challenged at a level that's challenging for you. So if you have glaucoma and you're tracking 2 objects and you're getting, commonly you're getting it right and sometimes you're getting it wrong, that is providing the right exercise at the right challenge level for your brain. And a person who's different than you might be tracking 6 objects and getting them right and sometimes wrong, and they're training at the right level for their brain. So I would encourage anyone with a visual a disorder like that, a visual disturbance like that, don't worry too much about whether you're getting a lot or a little of these objects. Worry just about, hey, am I being pushed to my limits? Because that's what's driving the exercise to your brain. Great question. Stephanie, do you see another one in there that you want to take?
Problem is that there are a lot that I want to take.
Well, I'm going to take one because it's actually kind of interestingly about attention. There's 2 or 3
Sure.
people who have asked us, hey, why do you put the slider at the top? It's kind of distracting. And that is a great question to ask during an attention webinar, right? How am I supposed to be paying attention to all these fish, Stephanie, when I got this cool thing at the top and these green arrows are lighting up and this bubble's moving back and forth and I got stars I'm earning? Like, isn't that just distracting? And that is a great question. And it's one that we have thought about quite a lot here at Posit Science, you'll be happy to know. And so what I would encourage you to do is generally use the challenge meter. We don't think you should be looking, we call this the progress meter, I guess, the challenge meter, Stephanie.
Yeah, up at the top.
And so I wouldn't say you should be looking at this all the time. And in fact, when you're actually tracking the objects, I would suggest you use that selective attention and ignore what's going on at the top of the screen. What you're intended to do is maybe glance up at the top of the screen from time to time when when the exercise is waiting for you to give an answer, or maybe before it's quite started, and it can provide a way just to kind of check in on kind of where you are. You can give a quick glance to see how many turns you have left or how many stars you've earned. But for the most part, particularly in these attention exercises, you should be using your attention focused on the gameplay area, and you should actually be ignoring the top part. Just use it to check in every now and then. Great question, and again, a very fun one for a discussion about attention. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so it does look like we got about 3 minutes until the top of the hour, so I think now is a good time to probably start wrapping up, if that's all right. So first off, thank you all so much for participating in today's webinar. It's always a joy working with you all and being able to demo these exercises for you and answer these questions in real time. That's what we're here for, and that's what we enjoy doing. Another note that I wanted to make is that next week there's going to be a follow-up email. That email is coming from me. It will have a link to this recording in it. It will also include a couple of feedback forms if you want to give us some more feedback about the webinars, or if you want to give feedback about BrainHQ in general. Those feedback forms are a really, really great way to get in contact with us and give us that information. Now, next month's webinar, we have a BrainHQ Academy webinar about how grief affects the brain. And then the next office hours webinar coming up in November is learning about the sort of life cycle of brain health research, how research studies go from start to beginning and all the way back around. So hopefully you will be able to join us for those. I think that's all I have for closing statements, but Henry, do you have any final takeaways that you want to share with our audience?
No, I thank everyone for coming. Thanks for your attention, if I may make that terrible pun or that terrible dad joke, to this important topic. And hey, if you have follow-up questions, as Stephanie mentioned, we're not able to get to them all, but if you have a follow-up question, please just go ahead and email us at support@brainhq.com. Stephanie and I take a look at those afterwards and try to follow up with every single one. These are great questions. Hope this has been helpful, and I will wish everyone happy brain training as we wrap up with the summer and head into the fall. Thanks so much.
All right, happy brain training, folks. Have a great one.